Hello and a very warm welcome to the Viewpoint with USI India, India's oldest think tank. Last month, we saw a rare thaw in the otherwise frozen relationship between India and Pakistan. Both the countries have recommitted themselves to the 2003 ceasefire agreement and have agreed to address the core issues that could undermine peace and stability. The details of the agreement are well known to us. What's not known is that for how long will this current ceasefire hold? In today's program, we look at post ceasefire, how can India and Pakistan dialogue be made sustainable? Joining us in the program from Islamabad is Ambassador Abdul Basit, who has served in India for almost a period of 3 to 4 years. Ambassador Basit has recently written a book called Hostility. Congratulations on your book and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saharan. What a pleasure to be with such esteemed panelists. Thank you very much.
From India, we have Ambassador TCA Raghuvan, who heads a very important think tank, Indian Council of World Affairs, an extension of the Ministry of External Affairs of India. He too has served as an ambassador of India to Pakistan. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Raghuvan.
Thank you for inviting me.
How wonderful it is to see both the ambassadors together sitting. From India, we have Major General B.K. Sharma as well. He is the director of United Service Institution of India. General Saab, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Arvind.
Ambassador Basit, if I may please start with you. How do you view the recently concluded speeches at the Islamabad Security Dialogue, where Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan said that it is India who needs to make the first move, and General Bajwa saying that it is time for us to bury the past and move forward? How should India view these statements? And above all, is there a growing appetite in Pakistan for a comprehensive dialogue between both the countries on our long-standing core issues?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. And sitting in Pakistan, as the way I look at things, this is not the first time that the two countries hit a stalemate, and then again we are busy trying to break the present deadlock. It's all okay. It's a kind of, we have a sense of déjà vu. And from my perspective, though one should be, the upside is that the two countries have agreed to renew their commitment to the ceasefire understanding of November 2003. But for me, the fundamental question is as to what next and how to proceed from this point onwards. If the idea is to break the stalemate and have talks for the sake of talks, then my worry is that we will again end up coming back to square one, as has been the pattern between Pakistan and India. Important is to get down to brass tacks, get down to resolving the fundamental issues which continue to bedevil our bilateral relationship. If that is the intention, then I am all for this engagement. But if this engagement is only to sit across the table and do more of the same, which has not really resulted in anything concrete in terms of putting this difficult bilateral relationship on an irreversible trajectory of peace, and to ensure viable peace between the two countries, so that it not only benefits our two countries but the entire region as a whole, then I think important it is absolutely, in my view, essential that the two countries move forward to resolve the core problems. And the core problem is, we all know, Jammu and Kashmir. Now we can revert to 9 December 2015 joint statement. That was the last document which was signed between Pakistan and India. Or we can go back to other RUFA agreement, I do not know. But I think the first challenge would be for the two countries to come up with a framework under which we can discuss the core issues. Definitely, terrorism would also be one of the issues which need to be discussed, and Pakistan would be very much, glad to have talks on the subject as well. So I think important in order to sustain this process, we need to do some serious spade work before we, and that can be on the back channel as well, before we can be somewhat certain about the prospects of this present thaw. Otherwise, we will, in my view, given, and I'm sure Ambassador Raghuvansh would agree with me, that we have been here before. We have been moving from a stalemate to a stalemate. We have been, been consuming our energies and breaking those log jams. But important is that how long, for how many more years we will continue doing this. Have the two countries really realized that the time for difficult decisions has come, and then move accordingly?
Ambassador Basit, if you could also please point out, when Prime Minister Imran Khan says that it is very difficult for Pakistan to make the first move after India's abrogation of Article 370. So he says that it is India that needs to make the first move. What are your expectations from India?
No, I think in Pakistan there are there are people who have not responded favorably to what our Prime Minister or even the Army Chief has said. Some people strongly feel that Pakistan's position was that we will not engage with India unless the 5th August measures are revoked, or the special status of Jammu and Kashmir is restored. So now we have it looks that the government is showing flexibility in order to reach out to India. But this reaching out to India, and as a private citizen, I also strongly feel would be of no consequence if there is no proportionate response from the Indian side. We now understand that, or at the government level at least, that since the entire Kashmir dispute has become far more complicated after the constitutional amendments. So I do not know how the BJP can really respond to what Pakistan is asking for. So India, by taking these measures in 2019, has kind of put the entire dispute in a cleft stick, I would say. We are now in a cul-de-sac. Even the BJP government would not know as to how to get out of this in order to facilitate some tangible, substantive discussions with Pakistan. So we are in a very difficult situation. I think one way, unless the Supreme Court of India declares these initiatives or these measures as null and void, because in many ways these measures do contradict or are in conflict with even the Constitution of India. So if that happens, if the Supreme Court of India comes to the rescue of the bilateral situation, that would be great. But I do not think that the BJP government itself can now do much about it, as I look at things realistically speaking. So it is all eyes are on the Supreme Court of India. If they can come to our rescue, that would be great. Otherwise, in my view, we will be spending most of the time in engaging with each other, but achieving nothing in the process, unless there is, I'm not privy to details, unless there is some implicit agreement, understanding that we can revive some kind of, outside formula outside the UN resolutions, as we had been discussing in the past from 2004 to 2008 on the back channel. If that is the informal understanding, I'm not aware of that. And if we will see, the time will show, because these things cannot be kept under wraps for very long. So let us hope for the best that this time round, both the countries are, they are willing to move forward. But I think much would depend on India's position, because it is India which has created a new problem, presented this problem in a more difficult way. It has complicated the situation by taking 5th August measures. Now it is for India to suggest ways as to how to get out of this in order to reach at some modus vivendi which is acceptable for all the stakeholders, including Kashmiris.
Dr. Raghuvansh, first of all, how would you respond to what Ambassador Basit has said? And also, when General Bajwa says that it's time to bury the past and move forward, how do we essentially move forward if all we are going to talk about is the past?
Well, thank you very much again for having me on this program, and very nice to be here with Abdul Basit and General Sharma. Well, in my view, which differs slightly from what Ambassador Basit just said, in my view, having a big bang approach to India-Pakistan relations is fundamentally flawed. The differences between the two countries are foundational. They don't date back to August 2019 or even 2001. They have been around for a very long time. Now, to say that every time a diplomatic effort is made, there is a sense of déjà vu, that is absolutely correct. But the history of diplomacy all across the world will encounter similar sentiments of déjà vu. Diplomacy really is the process of trying to bridge positions which are otherwise not easily bridgeable. And in India-Pakistan relations, the differences, as I said, run very deep. To assume that there is a solution waiting to be found somewhere, which is acceptable to both sides, is prima facie being unrealistic. The fact that for 70 years, we have had very, very troubled relations between our two countries. And it is also a fact that the best minds and the best of intentions in both countries have not always succeeded to the extent that they wanted to, and in the eyes of outside observers have not even succeeded very substantially, means that there are certain unbridgeable, unresolvable difficulties. So to expect that a big bang approach, that we sit down today, resolve everything, and then move forward to a golden utopia is, to my mind, unrealistic. I think, as Ambassador Basit also said, we need to talk about frameworks, we need to talk about processes, and we also have to be ready for a certain level of déjà vu at different points of time. I think the core issue between India and Pakistan is how to impart some amount of stability in bilateral relations, notwithstanding the fact that they have foundational differences. Now, Indians and Pakistanis, when you put in most contexts, will agree on 95% of what they see around the world. But on 5%, and especially on bilateral issues, they will disagree, and disagree most fundamentally. Certainly, these differences are also about Jammu and Kashmir. The problems between India and Pakistan in the present context did not begin in August 2019. The downslide had begun from early 2016 itself, and perhaps if one looks at deeper structural factors, there was an even deeper downslide which had been at work since the Mumbai terrorist attack, and despite I think a fair amount of effort on both sides, that downslide could not be arrested. But August 2019, and this is what I mean when I say that Indians and Pakistanis will never agree on certain things. August 2019 is by no means a litmus test when seen from an Indian perspective. I mean, in India, we've always felt that the Pakistanis have never really given any importance to Article 370 or to the Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. They always treated the state government and the elected governments of Jammu and Kashmir as a farce and a sham. So why this sudden importance just because they have been removed? They were never given any importance in the past. I remember, I think Abdul Basit will also remember sometime in 2014 or early 2015, an Inter-Parliamentary Union Conference or a Commonwealth Parliamentary Union Conference was supposed to take place in Islamabad. And these are pretty big conferences with speakers from a number of other countries attending. But because the J&K Legislative Assembly was a member of that particular conference, Pakistan chose to call the whole conference off. They said that this Legislative Assembly has no basis of any kind at all, so how can it attend the conference? And they preferred not having a conference rather than inviting the J&K Legislative Assembly. So my point is that these differences are there. Article 370, Legislative Assembly. Now to say that you cannot do anything till that status quo is restored, while in the past that status quo was never accepted and never given any kind of validity or legitimacy, these are, in my way of looking at things, somewhat contradictory positions. I think given what has taken place in February, I think we have to be forward-looking and we should try to find processes and frameworks which are robust, which can take the kind of pressures which we all know will come up in India-Pakistan relations, and we should try not to get deflected off course. The possibilities of failure are always there, but I said diplomacy by its very nature is undertaking tasks which have a high risk of failure. But that does not mean diplomacy should come to a halt.
Sure. Ambassador Raghuvansh, I would also like to ask you that, one feels in India that going by the stated formal policies vis-a-vis, each other's countries, it feels like, that we have nothing to talk about. For India, the core issue remains the cross-border terrorism. For Pakistan, it is the Kashmir. So if we are going to say that, okay, that the conversation, any conversation that happens, any dialogue between India or Pakistan, first of all, we need to talk about these issues. Don't you believe that in the COVID world, economies have been hit, public health has suffered. We have many serious challenges being posed ahead of us. We need to talk about those issues first, try and have some sort of confidence building measures, and then perhaps slowly, gradually talk about the core issues.
Well, that may sound reasonable to many of us in India, and it sounds very reasonable to me. But any process to work must have a takeaway for both sides. So it cannot be, I will say that I will put all the issues which concern Pakistan to be addressed in some indeterminate future, while we discuss issues which concern me or which I think are most important. Both sides have to agree to a particular process, to a particular framework. And as I said, there has to be a takeaway for both parties. Otherwise, no process by definition will be successful. I personally feel that public health is an area where India and Pakistan, and indeed other countries in South Asia and elsewhere in the region, can work together quite constructively. And it is a fact that in the history of India-Pakistan relations, there are a number of small instances. They are not major instances, but they are small instances where, despite all the other issues which exist in the relationship and which are of very troubling nature, they lead to very divisive issues, there are some small issues which have managed to ring-fence themselves out of the balance of India-Pakistan relations. I think public health, given the crisis which all of us are currently facing, is one of those issues. But as I said, both countries have to agree that a certain primacy has to be given to this issue, and this can be the beginning of where we begin our conversations or our processes. But I don't think it would be feasible to say that we will only discuss public health or the economy and not discuss other issues. I think we have to have a process which has comprehensive, so that different bases can be touched simultaneously.
I would like to ask this question to you, Ambassador Basit. Both the countries have witnessed almost a decade of extreme hostility towards each other. What are the factors that have led to the resumption of ceasefire at LOC?
I do not know, but if you recall that even in 2015, when our then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif addressed the UNGA session, he proposed to the Indian side that we may formalize our 2003 ceasefire understanding into a formal agreement. But obviously, at that point in time, India side did not respond to Pakistan's proposal. So Pakistan has always wanted tranquility on the LOC, and obviously, I'm sure this has not just come, about on its own. There has been some diplomacy, some back channel contacts which made the commitment possible. What really triggered this, I would not like to get into the realm of speculation, but I'm sure there is desire on the part of Pakistan at least to see as to how we can resolve our fundamental issues, how to have some peace in the region so that the region can focus on economic problems and have some kind of a plan of action to move towards economic development. So this what could have triggered, but I would not like to speculate as to what really pushed the two sides to renew their ceasefire commitment. Now, important because many people are interpreting this development in different ways. If you ask me, I am cautiously optimistic, frankly speaking. Though we get euphoric very quickly when it comes to India and Pakistan, but as I look at things, my feeling is that unless there is a big understanding which has already been reached between the two sides, I would be very careful in order to pinning much hopes on this present thaw. Let's hope that it does translate into something really concrete, because if it is more of the same, and I fully agree with Ambassador Raghuvansh that diplomacy is the art of the possible. But now, in Pakistan, there is some sense of frustration as well, that for how long we continue engaging with India bilaterally. India is not showing much interest in resolving the Kashmir dispute and gets Pakistan bogged down in peripheral issues and other issues. The CBM approach is okay, it's good. But when the time comes, because it's not a territorial dispute, the way the situation is in Jammu and Kashmir, we all know what is happening to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, the lockdown there, the draconian laws, the presence of security personnel, all these things, kind of create a sense of frustration among Pakistanis and Kashmiris. So we need to get down to brass tacks, as I said earlier. The same approaches would not deliver in my view. We have to be innovative, creative as to how to get out of the present difficult situation. If that is the intention, we're all for that. But if it is just, reaching out to each other and talking to each other, again, investing 2-3 years on putting together a framework, then I think we are not really doing anything. We are not being fair to each other and to Kashmiris as well. So we have to be, taking difficult decisions now, in my view. That was my point which I wanted to make. It is time to take difficult decisions. If both the countries are ready, and especially India, because as a bigger country and because Kashmir is the problem between our two countries, in my view, West stems from there. And if we are able to resolve the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in a fair manner, I think then the sky is the limit. Then you will see how things quickly change, transform between our two countries. But if we keep avoiding Kashmir, then I believe that they will not be able to achieve much in our bilateral engagement.
So are you suggesting that if we don't discuss the Kashmir issue at the very beginning, then there won't be any possibility of resumption of dialogue between both the countries?
No, I'm sure, because we know how diplomacy is conducted between our two countries. I'm sure the two countries would immediately, if there is any possibility, they will engage with each other to put up a kind of framework for talks, because I do not think that we can revert to 9th December 2015 framework, which was agreed to by the two sides then. So first step would be as to what kind of a framework the two countries need. My question is that if we keep rechurning, the same frameworks, we will go nowhere. It is time to keep the framework tight.
Just hold on to that thought.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the framework in a wee while. Dr. Raghuvan, Moeed Yusuf hinted in an interview with Karan Thapar in October last year that India had approached Pakistan for back-channel diplomacy. However, this time he has been very quick to react that he has not been involved in any sort of exchanges when it comes to the LOC ceasefire agreement. Where does the ownership lie in this current ceasefire? What do you think?
I think there are two issues involved. One is about the modalities and the instrumentalities by which this understanding was arrived at, and those details are not in the public domain. So one doesn't really know, and whatever comes out is on the basis of leaks, and one doesn't know how much credibility or reliance can be placed on those leaks. But on the more substantive issue, how did this happen, or rather, why did this happen? To my mind, and I think many people will agree with this, both in India and Pakistan, that the situation on the LOC, especially the kind of firefights and the kind of clashes which were taking place over there, are purely tactical in nature. They don't really add in any substantive or insubstantive way to the national interest of either country. So it's a matter of time when a tipping point is reached, when both sides agree that this is really a pretty pointless waste of resources on both sides. And as I said, exchange of fires on the LOC are purely tactical in nature. They don't achieve anything. So the fact that this continued for so long was perhaps because of certain larger factors in the relationship between the two countries. But I think those who expected that this situation on the LOC would be a kind of new normal and India and Pakistan would continue like this forever, I think that view is not correct. It's flawed.
Do you think there was a fatigue factor in both the armies, that it was about time to address this issue? Because
I don't know whether
we were not achieving anything other than just.
I don't think it's. I don't know whether fatigue is the right word to describe it. But certainly, I think many people would have felt on both sides that this is a pointless kind of situation, which is not yielding anything of any advantage to either side with it. And certainly that is my view. Exchange of fires leading to loss of life, destruction of property, and so on and so forth doesn't really, in fact, after some time, it doesn't even make the third page or fourth page of most newspapers. It is a entirely futile kind of situation to be stuck at for a long period of time. So I would say that it's a good step. It's a good thing that both sides came to this conclusion. Perhaps they came to it more or less simultaneously. Perhaps one came to it before the other. One doesn't know those details. But that they would come to this decision is not surprising, at least to my way of looking at the situation.
General Sharma, thank you so much for waiting patiently. It's been a long wait indeed. I'll get you in now, and I would like to know what are the dynamics at the LOC during ceasefire violations, and what can we do to make the current ceasefire sustainable?
Thank you, Arvind. Before I get to this particular question, I would briefly like to comment on what the two ambassadors have said. I feel that we should look at this entire outcome or development not from optics as much as from a strategic point of view. Otherwise, it will be business as usual. If you look at the tone and tenor of the speeches which were made by Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Chief of Army Staff, I will not comment on intent as yet, but at least I feel that there is a realization of lessons of history. That is why he said, let's bury the past. And there is also a realization of the new geopolitical realities. That is why there is less rhetoric on Jammu and Kashmir, and they say that certain developments have taken place there. And probably there may be an element of realization that a lot of water has flown in Jammu and Kashmir, and there has to be a new reference point if our dialogue has to be constructive and forward-looking. They have also discussed the endogenic and exogenic factors, at least in Bajwa's speech, and a very good, I would say, a geopolitical scan has come. And they talked about, connectivity and other regional integration issues in a very, very big way. But the sticking points still, of course, remain two. One is Jammu and Kashmir, and second is cross-border terrorism. And these, what discussions we are going to have on this, that is what actually merits that. What is the framework that we are going to create and address these two issues, at least not in the public forum as yet, but behind the curtains? How do we make the ground fertile for the other initiatives to take off? Otherwise, if these two issues are not handled in its entirety, other initiatives will become unsustainable. They will not be attached. I would say from the Indian perspective, I would say that we have to look beyond abrogation of Article 370. I would say this is as Indian position. Now, what happens beyond is a moot point. With regard to terrorism, we are looking at a credible, verifiable, sustainable, and irreversible process that has to be initiated by the other side. Therefore, just to get stuck in this, that India will take the first step or we expect Pakistan to show certain deliverables, I think it's more of a grandstanding, and we need to take discourse beyond that. Having said that, let me get on to the LOC. LOC, whatever happens at the LOC is just a symptom. It is not a disease. It's a symptom of the larger, I would say, the ailment which the bilateral relations actually suffer. And what my experience, I have commanded my troops at the line of control as an infantry officer. It is not the Indian side that wants to keep the LOC heated up. Many a times in 2003 we had, but whenever Pakistani side wanted, something to happen, they changed the narrative there, and LOC was activated. Be it in terms of giving cover to the infiltrators, be in terms of engineering certain border action team attacks on some of our posts, or certain attacks, terrorist attacks in the hinterland, which were owned by the terrorist leaders who are residing in the soil of Pakistan, or through other intelligence agencies. And when we got to know that, well, there is a hand of the agencies and the terrorist group which are sponsored by the other side, Indian side then went on to a retaliatory kind of a response. Therefore, if this intention is there that we will not use any of those tricks as in the past, Indian side would be more than happy to keep the LOC under control and see that this sustainable peace is there. Because unless the LOC remains normal, we will not be able to move along the other pincers that have been talked about in the speeches, or something which is happening behind the screen. So I personally welcome this step, and I hope this time over there is the change of heart and mind in the Pakistani military establishment to make it up practical. And
in past, we repeatedly saw that there was some sort of tension between the civil-military relationship in Pakistan, but this time it feels like they're certainly on one page, because Imran Khan had mentioned it numerous times, and now the army chief backing what the prime minister had said at the Islamabad security dialogue. Do you think the first confidence building measure we could perhaps take is upgrading our diplomatic ties? What do you think about it, Ambassador Raghuvan?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think diplomacy is something which we should never jettison. And it is something which has to be kept in place and used at all times. So I would say that restoration of diplomatic ties, and in fact, restoration of diplomatic ties is only one. It's representative of a larger change, because right now you have a situation where people cannot travel, quite apart from the pandemic, of course. People cannot travel. Even close family members are facing enormous difficulties. I think restoration of normal diplomatic relations will be certainly an important step, and it should be attended to. But as I said, a lot depends on what kind of framework is being envisaged. And there is not much in the public domain. And I think it's for good reason, because there's no point speculating about what is going to happen or thinking aloud about these things. And it is something which both governments will, I'm sure, be thinking about and working out. And whatever is the outcome, I would imagine that restoration of some semblance of normal diplomatic relations should be pretty high up in that priority list.
Ambassador Basit, what is your opinion on this issue? Because in fact, it was Pakistan that had downgraded the diplomatic ties with India. So do you think it would be a good gesture to walk the talk and try and have some sort of diplomatic ties between both the countries, and perhaps allow the Indian ambassador to take his position in the High Commission in Islamabad?
I think we should not be doing things in haste. If the two countries could reach an agreement on ceasefire, I think we can also do many things on the back channel in order to, as I look at things, I think it would be absolutely important for the two sides that we have a kind of modality of talks or a framework for talks in place before we back to, or we restore the situation, status quo ante, which existed before 5th of August 2019. So my advice to my government would be that we should be careful. We should be wary for whatever step we take. We should not be in a hurry. We should ensure that this time round diplomacy does deliver, and deliver in a substantive manner, rather than again engaging ourselves in peripheral issues. That has been the pattern, but my sense would be that we need to be more careful this time round, because I would not like to see Pakistan and India spending 70 more years and still talking on Jammu and Kashmir. I think we should be resolving this issue once and for all in order to have viable, durable peace in the region, and then focus on other things like connectivity, as our Army Chief and Prime Minister said very explicitly. And rather than talking about restoring the diplomatic relations at the ambassador level, all these things sound very good and great. But the point as a former diplomat, which comes to my mind, is that how we need to resolve the issues. And this time, I think Pakistan government needs to be more careful. Now that we have taken a position after 5th of August, we need to be very, very careful and should not be moving, things or taking things steps in haste. This is what my advice would be to my government.
General Sharma, you are a former state subject of Jammu and Kashmir. Ambassador Basit pointed out about the security scenario over there. Please talk us through what are the ground realities at the moment. What's really going on in Jammu and Kashmir?
See, in Jammu and Kashmir, like any other people, they want peace and development, right? And there are certain concerns about culture and its preservation. Those are the basic concerns. Now, I'll just tell you the ground reality is that a vast majority of openly state, but they have reconciled to the idea of abrogation of Article 370 and 35 alpha, and they want to move beyond that. Now, there are certain genuine concerns which need to be addressed, and these is the Domicile Act, that they don't want any demographic inversion to take place, so that people in large numbers from rest of India. That is one safeguard they are looking at. Second safeguard is about land, that it should not be that anybody at will can go and buy land in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir. And very recently, a statement has been made in the parliament that had any land from India there, and in fact, only some land has been earmarked for the development, setting up of industries and things like that. The issue is about that it should not be an all India competition wherein people from other states actually grab all those jobs. If we are able to create these, I think people sooner or later will get used to the idea. However, the demand of statehood is very much there because it is taken as some kind of an insult. And if these other factors are put in place, and in due course of time, after some political rebooting, if statehood is, by and large, people may be able to reconcile to this new normal. There is also now some kind of a political engineering at work with the delimitation, and some new parties are mushrooming. So some and realignments before it takes some kind of a shape. How that works out, I'm not very. The government of the day will be in a hurry to sort of go for a major initiative in terms of assembly election. These are the aspirations, and largely what is more important to the people is good governance, development, employment, and corruption, which exists in a phenomenal way at the district and below level. Indian state is able to address some of these issues. Probably Jammu and Kashmir would learn how to live in peace. And of course, most important is this LOC ceasefire, because once ceasefire is there, then some of those other initiatives, which were a moment of people and see, that's not been a hurry. These are all incremental processes, and we should not give too much of public hype and do not create too much of expectation. Take one step, walk the talk. Whatever statements our leaders are making, these have to be converted in, and people must be able to see the benefit of peace. And I'm sure in due course of time, both sides will recalibrate their position and achieve the other major intent that has been put in the statement of Prime Minister Imran Khan and Chief of Army Staff, which would be reciprocated by our side. You know, the terror element is taken care of.
Sure. So talking about the terror element, what are the deliverables for the Indian military in Kashmir?
See, terror element, firstly, let me tell you that today it's not become easy for cross-border terrorism, because a lot and our counter-infiltration posture and other things have improved. But Pakistan is finding new ways and means of, using of tunnels, using of quadcopters. There is some kind of people who are congregating in Turkey, in Istanbul, and that has become the new frontier of some kind of an anti-India propaganda. Very clearly see the hand, particularly ISI establishment in that. Now, some of those things Pakistan will have to go slow. They've already cap on some of the very, I would say, toxic leaders like Mohammad Azhar and, you Hafiz Sayyid and there's other kind of guys. Keep them under the wrap, because it is very important for Pakistan to get out of the grey list, get into the white list, as long as that is a sustainable process. And we shun up this policy of dealing with terrorism on selective basis. I think in due course of time, India would get an assurance that, well, Pakistani behavior towards selective terrorism has undergone a change, and there would be better incentive this side to engage in more meaningful dialogue with.
Okay. Quickly, Ambassador Basit, what are the core concerns from the Pakistani side in terms of the current ceasefire agreement we've had, and what are the core issues that we need to talk about?
I think first step, which would, in my view, help improve the bilateral atmosphere and would also help to put things in their correct perspective, would be that India stops now, this narrative or this mantra of cross-border terrorism. India also needs to understand that Kashmir struggle is not terrorism. So it is for the wider, right to self-determination. If India stops, if India wants to create a conducive, helpful environment, I think it is also important for India to recalibrate.
I think we are having some difficulty with Ambassador Basit's connection.
So it is important for India, in my view, to understand and to start changing, refining its, trite narratives about terrorism, or portraying the struggle in Kashmir as terror. Otherwise, we would keep on wrestling with these terms in our discourse. So in order to cleanse our discourse of these, aberrations, these anomalies, these misguided notions, it is very important that India should understand that what the real problem in Jammu and Kashmir is. So that is to take, as you know, in Pakistan, for that matter, I think our leadership has realized, and rightly so, to stop calling the leadership in terms of fascism or Nazism and so on and so forth. And right from the beginning, I was very much against that, and I have openly written about it, expressed my opinion that it is not for our leadership to call names. So I'm glad that that has now happened. At least our leadership has realized. But on the other side, it is important for the Indian leadership to stop calling the legitimate Kashmir struggle as terrorism, or keep accusing Pakistan of cross-border terrorism, because that only creates more problems and makes the task of diplomats more difficult to find mutually acceptable solutions.
On one hand, you talk about India should stop calling a legitimate freedom struggle as terrorism. Now, that's a very bold statement. Someone from the other side could also ask you that perhaps it's time for you to, be practical about the Kashmir situation now that the geographical boundaries are well defined. So makes no sense to even talk about it. What would you say to that?
No, I think, it all depends as to how you look at the dispute itself. If you keep on saying that Kashmir is an integral part of India, and we also need to get Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan in terms of Indian Parliament resolution of 22nd February 1994, then obviously we will go nowhere. what I'm trying to suggest is that we need to be decisive this time round. We need to be absolutely clear as to what we would like to achieve. If our intention is to keep, rechurning the same stuff again and again, then I'm sure we will hit another stalemate 2, 3 years down the road. So as I look at things, my only wish is that this time both the countries get down to the serious work and be decisive. Though it may take some time, I fully understand that it's a process. And talks do take time to produce results. But the question is India serious? As far as Pakistan is concerned, I can assure you that we are serious in resolving the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. We are serious about terror issues because on terror we also have serious concerns. As a diplomat and as a common Pakistani, I do feel that the time has come to take difficult decisions for both the sides. Is India ready? I do not know. And I would be slightly skeptical.
Okay, I'll bring in Ambassador Raghuvan on this. How do you respond to Ambassador Basit's comments regarding Jammu and Kashmir and the way forward? What are the core concerns from Indian side as well? If you could please elaborate, sir.
Well, as I said at the outset, on Jammu and Kashmir, the positions are not those which can be reconciled. We all know K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir.
Mhm.
In India, we feel Jammu and Kashmir, the whole of it, is an integral part of India. There is no way these positions can be reconciled. There's no magic bullet or silver bullet which is going to satisfy both sides. Sometimes people have this simplistic notion that if we can find a solution to these basically unbridgeable positions. General Musharraf, for instance, had this view that we should put on the table all the issues, then remove all those possibilities which are not acceptable to either side, and then what is left on the table, out of that a solution will emerge. And many of those who were his close advisors, I think on one occasion, told him that what will you do if there's nothing left on the table? That when you remove all the points which are not acceptable to either side, you may be left with nothing at all. So I think basically these are foundational differences. What you have to do is try to find means by which these differences are contextualized. If we both approach the issue from our respective radically revisionist agendas, we will not make progress. We have to have a approach which is realistic and also I would say which is not rash in its expectations or in its ambitions, because there you are setting yourself up for a fall. So I think process is the key, and I think both for people living in Pakistan occupied Kashmir and those in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, there is this certain fascination with the idea of solution, final solution. And in my view, the only solution which will work for people in Pakistan occupied Kashmir and those in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is for better relations between India and Pakistan. There is no solution possible to this dispute or to any of the other intractable disputes which exist around the world without some basic understanding that our relations must have a fundamental stability, and we must have a meeting of minds that beyond the point we will not let things deteriorate. I think these are really the considerations which come into operation, because if we go back to fundamentals, we will not agree on anything. I just wanted to, if I may, make one comment about terrorism. And yes, I think in Pakistan there is a great deal of resentment about the quote-unquote Indian narrative on terrorism. But I think Pakistan's problem is a much more fundamental one. Because if it was just an Indian narrative, I think it was pretty well equipped to deal with it. But I think their problem is that there is a global concern and a global narrative about Pakistan and its history with terrorist outfits and the history of terrorism in Pakistan, and the details of that are well known. I think the difficulty for Pakistan is seeing the relationship between the interface with India and this global interface. And the fact is that these two problems cannot be separated. They are related. There is no way that Pakistan can address issues of terrorism to satisfy the United States without acting against other terrorist groups which threaten other countries. I think that is really the issue which it has sought to confront in the past few years. And possibly in the future it will have more success. I certainly hope so.
Thank you, Dr. Raghuvan. Ambassador Basit, how would you like to respond to Dr. Raghuvan's comment on terrorism? After all, Pakistan is trying really, really hard to get out of the FATF situation. Surely there is some substance to the story. It's not just, something that has just been blown out of proportion.
No, as far as FATF is concerned, decisions, taken there are mostly politically driven, in my view, because barring 12 countries of FATF out of 39, I believe, not a single country has shown compliance with all the plans of action which are in place. So FATF's decisions are politically motivated, politically driven. I mean, I have no doubt about that. So let's hope that in June this year, Pakistan will be out of the grey list because we have now almost complied with almost all the points given to Pakistan. 3 or 4 were left, but I think we would be in compliance, in full compliance rather than partial compliance by June this year. As far as terrorism is concerned, we all know that Pakistan has been one of the most unfortunate countries. We have a long border with Afghanistan, and then there have been countries in the region who took full advantage of the volatile situation there and how the countries tried to destabilize Pakistan in many, many ways. So we are conscious of all those things. Once, Mujahideen, they became terrorists, and the Taliban, who were terrorists, now they are sitting across the table in Moscow talking to the major countries, and then soon we will have the Istanbul process in place. So terrorism is a very subjective term in my view, and it is also in many ways. Even Osama bin Laden was once hero, and was launched in Afghanistan in the early 90s. So all these things are very subjective. But the reality is that Pakistan has also suffered hugely at the hands of terrorism. And thank God that after much efforts through Zarbul Azb operation and now Zarbul Fasad operation, we have been able to defeat this, not totally extirpate this menace, but we have been able to address or to defeat in many ways this scourge. And I hope that things will continue improving in Pakistan. But the regional countries have also played, their own role in destabilizing Pakistan, and we all know about that as well.
General Sharma, I'd like to quickly bring in you. What is your observation, Dr. Raghuvan and Ambassador Basit has just pointed out on terrorism? After all, there is, an ecosystem of terrorism in Pakistan that exists, and repeatedly, time and again, Pakistani government had justified its action to the international community, and they can't be very subjective, as Dr. Basit had pointed out.
See, I feel that, this should be the fundamental issue for Pakistan to address. This problem of terrorism and terror financing has cost them dearly, leave aside their relations with India. I was just reading a report in one of the leading Pakistani think tank that there has been a loss of $38 billion into their economy because of this FATF sanctions. There have also been problems about, say, World Bank loan $500 million on one count and $300 million on another count. Today, the inflation is more than 14%. Their growth rate was going into minus 4%. All this is because, and no FDI can come into Pakistan no matter how much you talk about CPAC. CPAC has its own attendant risk, being totally dependent on one particular country. Unless you're able to diversify your economy and get foreign direct investment from other countries, you will not be able to take off. You can't be a sort of a surrogate state or a satellite state of a one country. So therefore, unless they are able to address this issue of terrorism in its holistic manner and dismantle this ecosystem which has developed there over the years, it will be very difficult for them to establish their legitimacy and credibility in the eyes of international community. I think we cannot take it very lightly that in some Asia Pacific group, a gang of countries are there to mean Pakistan not so well. I think I won't subscribe to that view. There is something, unless there is, something, there can't be a fire without a smoke, without a fire, or fire without a smoke. So they have to address, and I think they are addressing that issue, because if these three remainder issues, if they are not addressed by June, then they will have to pay more penalty. Now, it's very easy for say and I totally empathize with a common Pakistani that why should a country suffer 70,000 casualties in about a decade's time? So they have suffered more on account of terrorism than perhaps India has suffered. But then they have to go into the real causes of why their own people who are adherents of that religion are turning their anger and their fire onto their own people. There must be something. And unless that diagnosis is done in a very dispassionate and objective manner, you will keep having more Al-Mizans and, National Action Plan and Raddul Fasad and whatnot. So therefore, it's high time that this terrorism is given a very, very serious thought. And this is a low-hanging fruit for India and Pakistan. Why can't we go for joint sharing of intelligence? Why can't we look at some kind of a cooperation even in Afghanistan? Why can't we have joint mechanism even to monitor the operational dynamics along the line of control? These are the issues that we need to discuss rather than being stuck in the old narratives and actually resort to these blame games and one-upmanship.
Surely one needs to have a very large-hearted approach towards these issues and perhaps, try new ideas. Finally, I would like to ask each of you, starting with Ambassador Basit, what would it take to derail the current ceasefire?
I mean, we will go, it would derail. I mean, I'm not sure if the process is really in place, and then to talk about its derailment. But obviously, if we do not agree on the fundamentals as to how we would address the fundamental issues, then I think this process is not going to go anywhere, because there is very little appetite as far as the people of Pakistan are concerned to subscribe to any process or to any engagement which does not lead to a resolution of the core issues. Because and that to me is fundamental. So let's see, we are keeping our fingers crossed and hope that if at all there is any process in place, it would lead to something concrete rather than again engaging us in peripheral issues.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Raghuvan, your comment on it, please.
Well, in my view, India-Pakistan relations historically have moved in cycles. There are crests and troughs. So it is inevitable that that pattern will be maintained in the future also. So certainly, while I do not wish for it, and I hope it does not happen, that if we are at a crest right now, I don't think we are, but at some stage we may be, a trough is bound to follow. So a derailment, if you wish to call it that, yes, is possible. There can be any number of reasons why that will come about. The way I would like to see the future is if our diplomacy of both countries can be creative enough so that, to borrow a simile from the pandemic, we should learn how to flatten this curve, to introduce more stability, to reduce the intensity of the crests and the troughs, both of them. Because I think the cycle of euphoria followed by a great deal of frustration itself is something which is quite a big negative factor. So the challenge before us, and I think that is how we should look ahead constructively, is to see how do you impart stability, because I don't see a situation where either country is going to give up on its fundamental positions in the near or even in the foreseeable future.
General Sharma, your point on this, please.
See, with all responsibility, I would say that India will abide by ceasefire in letter and spirit. We've done it in the past, and we are not interested in any firefighting or any, this tit for tat kind of a thing on the LOC. But what has happened that we have to see that how Pakistan's military establishment is able to prevail upon some of its other elements who are traditionally known to take a very hardcore position on these issues, and also an array of actors who are involved in this whole border violation. If they are able to manage those actors and those factors, I think the ceasefire is sustainable. But one thing I can say, that if anytime there is a violation from the other side, and if Indian side intelligence gets a clue of it that there was a hand of Pakistani military establishment, retaliation from this side would be disproportionate, because those red lines are very clear and there is a degree of wariness which is set in, and therefore I think retaliation will be very, very severe, and we would again enter the mouth of the snake and go down the ladder to square one. So Pakistan will have to create safeguards and some mechanisms to see that we don't drift away from what we are intending to achieve.
In the end, I would simply like to say that history has given us a difficult problem that is not of anyone's choosing. We cannot afford to remain prisoners of the past and to repeat costly mistakes. Young and the innocent shall face the consequences of our generation's decisions. Time alone shall tell whether we had the wisdom, the compassion, and the courage to cherish our differences and to dream new dreams. On that note, I would like to thank all three of you. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.